It's at last time to talk about Yuta Okkotsu. Now he's been getting some crazy traction lately. The boy's back for real and he's no joke, making his mark in a massive way, sticking it to the main villain. And I must say I'm cautiously hopeful, but ready to experience personal suffering nonetheless. I'm gonna cover some character stuff for Yuta, then talk about his power scaling for a while. Now Yuta, as you know, started way back when in Volume 0, but they kept him hidden for a long time, and his absence was used to great effect, paying off in multiple fiery sections of the manga. Every time he shows up to the battlefield, things slow down. It's a major moment. His first return had everyone frozen in place, overwhelmed with fear, because his presence is that heavy. Yuta's a fan favorite character, not simply for being strong and having cool abilities, but because he commands all this power and presence while maintaining one of the most pure hearts in the series. He's a kind person, and his care shines through in all of his appearances. Also, his power isn't strictly a gift he was handed, rather it brought him trauma, restricted his freedom, his ability to do good, and have others perceive him as he truly is. Yuta grew up as someone who experienced great loss, unfairly taken, became a cursed child that classmates shivered in the presence of. The kid who we've seen so set on not killing, even those who were trying to put him in the grave like Ryu and Uro, was once uncontrollably hurting people. This is why peace is so crucial to his character. His past has surely polarized him against needless violence. He was unfit for society, but didn't take it out on the world, he took it out on himself, even attempting to delete himself in the first time we see him. Yuta's a self-sacrificing soul. He overcame his curse, found inner peace, and in tandem with realizing control over his power, managed to shine through to his new friends and find a home at Jujutsu High. Even through the years, and with everything he goes through, and awful world he inhabits, Yuta acknowledges that he's blessed. He stays grateful because he remembers the lows of having no one. And this is a brief look at what makes him so likable, why we want to see him win. Quickly though, please like and subscribe if you like this sort of content, it's highly appreciated. While Yuji reconciles with his demons by to an extent embracing them, falling in line with the moral ambiguity of the world, acknowledging for instance that he and Mahito are the same in some vague sense, Yuta's character is about winning with love. He's the defiant one against the picture of strength, being a measure of negative emotions and selfishness exclusively. This is exemplified by his biggest attacks being the pure love beam and the unconditional love domain. So there's no opponent better positioned to challenge him on this angle than Sukuna, who puts himself on a pedestal above all other beings, while Gojo is this solo warrior, strongest when he's alone, top of the food chain, who triumphed over Toji by being more egotistical, more indifferent to others, a pathway to strength that shaped the philosophy Gojo passed on, telling people like Megami that you'll always be alone at the end. But even though Gojo reached beyond the heights of everyone else, there's a glimmer of doubt to this picture, as when Gojo passes on to the afterlife, all his old friends are there to greet him. Then he acknowledges what he'd been telling people about death was incorrect. So it begs the question of there just possibly being another way. Yuta embraces others, doesn't affirm himself as the ultimate creature, and is particularly uninterested in himself, as they say in this volume extra here. Yuta's the opposite of what we've been told to think. He's the challenger to the established paradigm, even if he doesn't realize it, which may be reason to think his statement about being weaker than Hikari's a little bit generous. Can he get to the top through the power of love, with others at his side? That's the question at play right now in the manga. He's facing off with the guy who gave Gojo a run. Came out on top, unfortunately. Yuta's nearly the last line of defense for the modern era of sorcery, and quite apparently the top dog remaining for sorcerers. As the title of the video suggests, Yuta is the strongest modern sorcerer. Now when it comes to Yuta and Sukuna's fight, you'd be reasonable to wonder how he could even stand a chance. If you look at his recent fights, you might think they're okay. He had a nice little showdown in Sendai Colony, seemed pretty strong, won all his fights, but he was pushed to his limit by Ryu of all people, who got mopped up in a split second by just 15 finger Sukuna. But I want to make clear that there's a lot more going on here that's important to consider. Let's for a moment lean into the idea. Say Ryu fought equally with Yuta, who's vastly inferior to the Sukuna that stands before Yuta today. Nonetheless, there remains an avenue for Yuta to escape this. At the end of his fight with Ryu, Ryu explains the thing that keeps him from the top, a limit imposed on Yuta by his mentality. He's too soft, Ryu says. What Yuta needs is overwhelming aggression that disregards all else, like a calamity. Now this may be partly true. Take Gojo for example, he's at that level, but does he really not care about anyone else at that point? No, he definitely cares about his students, but he remains strong enough nonetheless. It's not that Gojo's holding back on anyone, he fights like a demon who cares about people. Think back to Shibuya, where he was deeply concerned about protecting the civilians in the train station. But when it comes to fighting for a purpose, Gojo's struck with fury and madness, and this is the element Yuta needs to implement. This is what he lacks in his fight with Ryu, and it's no doubt that he has it here against Sukuna. We've seen this mentality from him before when fighting Geto in Volume 0. The moment where Yuta flips the switch to killer intent is startling. All the time spent with him as a mellow-mannered, shy pacifist feeds into that moment, a flood of emotions, overcoming his standard way of being, pushing him away from the no-kill rule he wanted to live by. But that motivation is dwarfed by a burning desire to avenge the people he cares about, and today it's him facing off against the beast that murdered his sensei. And so I sincerely hope they use some dramatic emotional expression, similar to what we got in Volume 0, to raise Yuta to the forefront once again. Who knows, maybe even have him win. I think that would be the best path out of our obvious options for resolution. The series without Gojo is in need of characters that we can bet on, and the only other person with the history behind him to lead us forward in Gojo's absence is Yuta. After all, that was Gojo's chosen heir. He warned Kenjaku that this guy would come back and mess that body of his up once again, which he did, and this would be the finalization of that prophecy were Yuta to pull through. Now, I don't think Yuta will outright be an equal to Sukuna in this arc, but I think that he'll stand out beyond all other competitors, with the possible exception of Yuji. But I think it would be wiser to not have his progression be that outrageously steep. Let his senpai have this part of the series, and maybe Yuji can rise up in the future. Continuing with the thoughts surrounding Yuta's Sendai Colony battle, along with having a more effective mindset for this fight than back then, Yuta has shown other signs of being outright stronger. Did you notice that Rika is massive now? If you compare this base Rika to the one in the fight with Yuji or Ryu, there's no comparison. Sukuna's whole body fits in the palm of Rika's hand, where before Yuji's head could fill it. Just look at how Rika's body covers this whole wall, above these two little tower things that on their own are at least double the height of Sukuna. Rika's bare minimum doubled in size, and even the fact Yuta's bringing her out in this form against Sukuna of all people, where in Sendai Colony he went right to full manifestation, is screaming to me that she's stronger now. I mean, in Sendai she got one punch by Ryu, but now she's taking backhands from 20 finger and just moving on. Another change in the scale that Yuta's power is presented shows up when he appears to this fight, where the ground in a vast area around him is detonating on contact. Compare this to his showings after Shibuya, where it's a small portion of this wall that's feeling the impact. Now, if you think this stuff isn't intended to mean this, I'm not going to hold that against you, but I think it fits really well into what's seemingly a series-wide power cliff, as characters who we would have considered utterly irrelevant fodders are suddenly shooting up to relevance like Kusakabe, Giguruma, and even Yuji. Yuta, remember, is an extreme prodigy himself, regaining his special grade status only 3 months after Volume 0, and was able to become, as stated, in this modern era, second only to Gojo, going on to label him as a prodigy. This isn't a character statement, it's a narrator one. I don't know how people can be so closed off to the idea that Yuta is him. It's right in your face. At least acknowledge that both perspectives may be sensible. One last point about his fight in Sendai Colony, and then we'll move on to some of his potential rivals. Even with what we've covered about that encounter with Ryu and Sendai, it's made patently clear that Yuta just allowed himself to be overcome by Ryu's final attack. Think about this. At full power, Yuta's blasts are slightly weaker than Ryu's, so his intention was to build cursed energy at a faster rate. Before Ryu could finish charging, his extremely notable highest cursed energy output ever recorded, that crucially isn't held back by the use of domain as stated. Yuta, on the other hand, had not replenished his curse technique, and so his output of cursed energy is diminished in this clash. You can even think back to the fight between Higuruma and Yuji, where they explain that not having access to your technique can throw off your fundamental manipulation of cursed energy. And even under these circumstances, Yuta appreciates his opponent to such a degree that his heart was melted. He let Ryu charge up, and no surprise Yuta's beam gets overpowered. It's not an essential weakness to Yuta, it's him not seeing Ryu as a real enemy and being empathetic toward him in specific. Now this is cool, but let's not forget Yuta was getting tag teamed the majority of this fight. At no point does Ryu deal with the continuous focused efforts of Yuta and Rika. Yuta is forced to use tons of cursed energy fighting and healing against other opponents, so this just isn't a fair comparison from so many angles of consideration. Now I'd like to be quite charitable to both sides, so in the past I'd grant that there's some real comparability between Yuta and Ryu, where for example if Ryu is getting casually one-shot by say 15-finger Sukuna like he did, this would still be above Yuta's power level. But as you compound these factors and consider various statements and feats, it's really no surprise that Yuta's lining up as the top guy in this era. Think about the heavy hitters for a second. These are the top dogs of Jujutsu High, ready to fight if Gojo's unable. At their best, they're mostly unchallenged. And guess who's their leader? It's Yuta. Now you can talk about what that means, maybe it's this, maybe it's that, but even if not conclusive on its own, what are the sort of things that are valuable to a squad of fighters whose purpose is to combat the bad guys? Well, how about combat itself? I mean, these aren't difficult concepts. Now other things can be included, maybe he's smarter, more strategic, that's fair. But at the same time, these are also qualities that give an edge in battle, especially with the versatility that Yuta possesses, having so many techniques. But it's important to understand that just because something doesn't conclusively support a conclusion, doesn't mean it's not lending some degree of support to it, and we need to be aware of the total evidence circulating the discussion. I think on the whole, this observation fits the picture quite well. Now what's more is, Maki, one of his would-be competitors, pretty much just says Yuta's that guy. Compared to him, she's disposable. He's their insurance should Gojo lose. In this same moment, Yuta's claiming he can deal with Maharaga of all things. Now this sounded a bit outrageous back then, but now, does it seem so crazy when he's boxing with Sukuna? Not really. And no one around him acts like this is crazy. Yuji thinks this is the best plan. And yeah, it gets undercut by specifically Gojo's plan to use purple, but that's got nothing to do with whether or not Yuta and Riko were capable of hanging in there with Maharaga and Agito. Lastly, I want to talk about the current Sukuna Yuta's going against. I won't cover everything, but this Sukuna is above the Sukuna that's above Technique Kashimo in every way. Because his cursed energy output has been raising since then, even the super messed up Maguna was keeping up with that Kashimo, where base Kashimo is at least at Hikari's peak level. Yuta is tagging and hurting the Sukuna more than once, so bringing up how Yuta says Hikari can get stronger than him is just not really the hill to die on. That statement's not only rejected by Maki in the same panel, but we've covered the particularly selfless, generous nature of Yuta, and this is almost besides the point of who's actually stronger between them. Hikari in base has like nothing going for him. If he finds himself in a domain clash where he can't rely on Jackpot, it's so over it's not even funny. His base cursed energy output is far worse than Yuta's. His cursed energy control is worse. He's just not very impressive without his technique active. Just look at how awful he did against Charles. But I'll keep this short. That's all for today. Hope you enjoyed the little Yuta breakdown. This is Woski and I'll see you later. Peace.